It's hard to believe it, but the Nostalgia Critic was at one point a highly respected content creator. Back in YouTube's early years, he was actually held in high regard, up with the likes of the AVGN. Of course, ever since the channel Awesome incident last year, he's become somewhat of a laughingstock amongst bad reviewers, and more or less just proves that sometimes you really should just give up on making videos. None of that stops an alarming amount of people from still watching his god-awful content, however. I don't know why you'd want to do that. At this point, I'd sooner watch an old-school irate gamer video over this. I will be honest though, I was actually a pretty big fan of the Nostalgia Critic prior to 2015. He used to be one of my favorite content creators. By far my favorite videos from him were his commercial commentaries, something I'd like to see more of, albeit from more respected YouTubers. I've always found a lot of commercials to be laughably out of touch with the everyday world, and ripe with mockable material. But I digress. Despite my nostalgia for Doug's earlier work, I can't let that distract from the fact that he has gone downhill and is now a shadow of his former self. Or at least that's what I've heard. Who knows? Maybe the hate isn't deserved, and it's nothing more than a knee-jerk reaction to a year-old controversy. Let's check out his review of Pink Floyd's The Wall. Approximately 40 minutes later, Slayer-kun was left in a state of shock at the pure horror he had just witnessed. These were his following thoughts. What the fuck was that? Okay, so this isn't a fucking review, but rather a goddamn musical. And a very cringy one, too. No wonder this one's been getting quite a bit of hate. And to add insult to injury, there's even an entire album of songs from the review, featuring guitarist Rob Scallon of YouTube fame. Although even that can't save it. I love you, Scallon, but this was a pretty embarrassing thing to take part in. Just what the fuck were you thinking? Gotta make that money somehow. And this review really showcases one of the worst things about recent Nostalgia Critic. The skits. Poorly acted, unfunny skits. You'd get more comedy value out of making fart sounds with your armpits. It's not like skits are a bad thing to include in reviews. If done correctly, they can actually be the highlight of a review. But they just fall flat in the case of the Nostalgia Critic, and I much prefer when he doesn't use them. I decided to watch his Aladdin 2019 remake review and actually found myself enjoying it somewhat, simply because it lacked skits and more or less focused on the review instead. Sure, it was pretty boring and meh, but I could actually stomach it without feeling secondhand embarrassment. Something I can't say for his review of The Wall, which might be his worst review yet, and I'm not alone in thinking that. This musical with acting so bad that it makes The Room look like Oscar-worthy material isn't a fucking review, and should have never been produced in the first place. Anyways, how's the rest of his content? It's pretty meh. While I can tolerate his non-skit reviews, it's pretty clear that after over a decade of making videos, his heart isn't exactly in it anymore. Now granted, this doesn't just apply to the Nostalgia Critic, seeing as even the AVGN is guilty of this. Now listen, I still have a ton of respect for the AVGN for being one of the few YouTubers who hasn't turned out to be a horrible person, and I do look forward to whenever he uploads. But his recent content can be rather hit or miss sometimes. Like, I'd be lying if I said I didn't find his review of Black Tiger to be horrifically unfunny, even with the presence of Gilbert Gottfried. I mean, Gilbert is 64 years old, and seeing him trying to pass off PS4 poo as comedic gold just hurts to watch.
You know, I actually got my own PS4 poo.
But that's beyond the point. At least the AVGN is someone you can still respect, while the Nostalgia Critic is meh at best and absolutely atrocious at worst. And it's really a shame because, as stated before, he used to be one of my favorites. But you know, maybe that was because I was in my teens. People change and grow up, and with age comes the realization that things were never as good as we once thought they were. And I'm starting to feel that way about the Nostalgia Critic. With the death of my youth comes the dying interest in things I once considered myself a fan of. Yes, I still enjoy some of his classic content to an extent, but with Doug's tarnished reputation, I'm forced to watch that content privately in a dark room where nobody will ever see me. Listen, if you still enjoy the Nostalgia Critic, by all means do so, but don't act surprised that a growing number of people see him as nothing more than a joke. I really think that the Nostalgia Critic should just call it quits at this point. A YouTube series should never outstay its welcome, and in my opinion, the Nostalgia Critic should have ended a long time ago. The times have simply changed, and Doug's reputation has been dragged through the mud by his inability to call it a day. And considering how hated his review of The Wall was, I think there's no better time to end the series than now.